Today, I'll tell you a story so dangerous, it nearly burned an entire valley to the ground, deep in the wild American frontier, where winter closes in like a predator, and mercy can be more deadly than violence. This is a land ruled by greed, fire, and men who believe money makes them untouchable. A place where fate pulls strangers together for reasons no one can escape. It all started with one exhausted man and a child asking for shelter. A small act of kindness that would awaken a war. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The autumn wind tore across the Montana territory like a wounded beast, sharp with frost and heavy with the warning of winter closing in. 6 months had passed since they laid Eamon Whitell in the frozen earth behind the barn. 6 months of stubborn cattle, splintered fences that refused to stay whole, and endless nights spent staring into darkness while wolves cried somewhere beyond the hills. In the beginning, neighboring ranchers had come by with kind words and helping hands. But as summer thinned into fall, their visits faded away with it. A widow left alone on the frontier was like a lantern set in a gale. Everyone understood it was only a matter of time before the light went out. Lorna Whitell pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the coarse wool scraping against hands hardened by work. At 32, she was still young by most reckonings. But the West had a way of carving years into a person faster than time ever could. The small mirror inside the cabin showed lines beside her green eyes that hadn't existed 2 years earlier. Her honey-colored hair, once worn loose with pride, was now twisted into a plain knot from dawn until nightfall. She had just turned back toward the door when movement caught her eye. 2 figures on horseback, black shapes cutting through the dying light. Her fingers shifted without thought toward the Winchester resting beside the frame. Travelers seldom rode this far from town, and those who arrived after sundown rarely carried good fortune with them. The riders advanced at an unhurried pace, and as they drew nearer, details took shape. A man sat tall in the saddle, wrapped in a long, weather-beaten duster that had known many seasons. Behind him clung a smaller form, a child. They halted at the gate, and the man dismounted with the careful ease of someone shaped by too many miles on horseback. "Ma'am," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Sorry to trouble you so late. Name's Bren Carson. Folks in town said you might be looking for a ranch hand." Lorna kept the rifle close, though she did not lift it. "Who told you that?" she asked. "Woman at the general store, Edna Blythe," he replied. "Said the Whitell Ranch was being run by a widow alone. Said you were too proud to ask for help, but might accept it if it showed up on your doorstep." Despite herself, Lorna felt her mouth twitch. That sounded exactly like Edna, always watching, always interfering. "And you just happened to be looking for work?" she asked. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked early with gray and a face marked by sun and wind. "Truth is, ma'am, my daughter and I have been riding near 3 weeks. We need a place to see out the winter. I know cattle, can fix what's broken, and I don't drink or gamble. Honest work for honest pay." At that moment, the child slid down from the horse. Lorna saw her clearly for the first time, a girl of 7 or 8, thin as a fence rail, dark hair tangled by travel. Her eyes were too large for her face. She clutched a rag doll to her chest, and even in the fading light, dust coated her dress and weariness bowed her small shoulders. "Papa," the girl whispered, tugging at his coat. "I'm cold." Something tightened in Lorna's chest. She thought of the empty rooms inside the cabin, the silence that pressed in every night, the way she sometimes sat 2 places at the table before memory caught her. "What's your daughter's name?" she asked quietly. "Mara," Bren said. "That's her." Lorna studied them, truly studied them. The man's boots were worn thin at the heels. His clothes were patched but clean. The child's dress had been let down more than once, the hem stitched with layers from different years. Yet it was their eyes that decided her. She recognized that look. She saw it every morning in her own reflection, the gaze of those who had lost something that could never be replaced and were still learning how to keep breathing afterward. "You can put your horses in the barn," she said at last. "There's fresh hay in the loft. When you're finished, come to the house. I've got stew on the stove, and it's more than one person needs." Relief crossed Bren's face before he managed to hide it. "We're grateful, ma'am. Truly." Lorna watched as they led the horses away. Mayra's small hand locked tight around her father's. The wind rose again, scattering dry leaves across the yard like brittle bones. Winter was coming. That much was certain. Yet for the first time since Eamon's death, the thought did not fill her with fear. She went back inside, stirred the stew, and fed more wood to the fire. The cabin felt altered somehow, as if it were stirring awake after a long, lonely sleep. Without thinking, she set out 3 bowls instead of 1. 3 spoons. 3 cups. The motion felt awkward, but right. Through the window, she caught the glow of a lantern moving inside the barn. The man would be thorough, she suspected. And for the first time in 6 months, the house no longer felt quite so empty. He carried himself like a man who knew first impressions mattered, especially when a child's safety rested on how he was judged. Lorna Whitell paused in the middle of her preparations, struck by a memory that rose without warning. 10 years earlier, Eamon Whitell had stood on her father's porch, hat in hand, asking for work. She had watched him then from the staircase, a 15-year-old girl drawn to his quiet seriousness and steady eyes. Now she stood on the opposite side of that same kind of door, holding the power to alter another life with a single answer. The knock came sooner than she expected. When she opened the door, Bren Carson and Mayra stood on the porch. Their faces were freshly washed at the pump. The girl's hair had been hurriedly braided, and she wore a dress still worn thin, yet cleaner than the one she had arrived in. "Come on inside," Lorna said, stepping aside. "Warm yourselves by the fire." They entered carefully. Mayra's eyes widened as she took in the cabin. It wasn't grand. Frontier homes rarely were. But Lorna kept it tidy and lived in. Quilts stitched by her mother hung along the walls, and Eamon's books still rested on the shelf he had built during their first winter. "It's pretty," Mayra whispered, then glanced up at her father, worried she'd spoken too freely. "It's all right," Lorna said gently. "Thank you. Would you like to help me set the table?" The child nodded at once, placing her cloth doll carefully on a chair before following Lorna to the cupboard. Her hands trembled as she carried the bowls, holding them as though they were fragile treasures. By the time supper was served, the cabin had filled with something long absent. Voices. Bren ate with the restrained gratitude of a man who had known hunger, while Mayra fought sleep between mouthfuls. "How long has it been since her mother?" Lorna asked quietly, nodding toward the drowsing child. 4 months, Bren replied, his voice rough. "Fever took her. We had a small place in Wyoming, but—" He stopped, then squared his shoulders. "Sometimes staying hurts worse than leaving." Lorna felt the truth of that settle deep in her chest. "And you've been on the road since then?" "Working where we could. Harvest helped some, but most folks don't want a hand who comes with a child." He looked at Mayra, his expression softening. "I don't blame them, but I couldn't leave her with strangers. Not after everything." The fire popped in the hearth, shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, a distant howl drifted in. Wolf or wind? Hard to tell. Mayra stirred and whimpered. Without thinking, Lorna reached out and brushed the child's hair smooth. "There's a small room off the kitchen," she heard herself say. "Used to be storage. It's got a window and space for 2 bedrolls. If you're willing to stay, it's $30 a month plus board, and I'll expect you to earn it." Bren's head lifted sharply. "You're offering us the work?" "A trial," Lorna corrected. 2 weeks. The land here doesn't forgive mistakes." She met his gaze steadily. "I've got 300 head of cattle, 20 horses, and winter closing fast. I need someone who works hard and thinks while doing it." "You'll have that," he said simply. "You have my word." They shook hands across the table, his calloused palm meeting hers. It was a frontier agreement, sealed by necessity and honor alone. Mayra had fallen fully asleep, her cheek resting on her folded arms, the cloth doll trapped beneath her chin. "Let me," Bren began, rising. "Finish your coffee," Lorna said softly. "I'll take her." She lifted the child, surprised by how light she felt. Mayra stirred but did not wake, her arms curling instinctively around Lorna's neck. The trust in that small gesture cracked something inside her, like ice breaking on a winter stream. The storage room had been cleaned earlier that morning, almost as if she had known. Lorna laid Mayra on the old feather mattress and tucked a quilt around her thin frame. In the lamplight, the girl looked even younger. Angles too sharp, hollows shaped by missed meals. When Lorna returned, Bren stood near the fire, staring into the flames. "I'm grateful, Mrs. Whitehall." "More than I can say." "Lorna," she corrected. "And save your thanks until you see what needs fixing. This place has fought me every step since." She stopped herself. "Since Eamon passed," he said quietly. 6 months. She nodded. "It gets easier," he said. "Not easy, just easier." They stood in silence, 2 souls hollowed by loss, recognizing something familiar in each other. At last, Bren cleared his throat and stepped back. "I'll turn in, if that's all right. I'd like an early start tomorrow." Sunup," Lorna replied. "Breakfast before first light." "Sunup," Lorna Whitehall said quietly. "I'll have breakfast ready by 5. Bren Carson touched the brim of his hat in thanks and disappeared into the small room. Lorna heard him moving softly inside, adjusting blankets, murmuring gentle words to Mayra, though the child was likely already asleep. When the house fell quiet again, Lorna banked the fire and prepared for bed. But rest refused to come. Instead, she stood at the window, gazing out toward the barn and the corrals, across the wide stretch of land that had once felt full of promise, and now weighed on her like a burden. By morning, she would know whether she had made a wise choice or invited trouble into her home. Yet tonight, for the first time in many months, the cabin no longer echoed with emptiness. Somewhere nearby, a child slept safely. A father kept watch. They were not her family, might never be. But they were life, stubborn, breathing life. The kind that refused to vanish, no matter how hard grief tried to drive it away. The wind had settled, and stars slowly pushed through the thinning clouds. Lorna rested her fingertips briefly against the glass, thinking of Eamon Whitehall, wondering what he would say about her decision. Then she turned from the window and lay down. Morning would arrive soon enough, bringing all the trials that came with holding a ranch together in unforgiving country. But tonight, she was not facing it alone. The scent of coffee and frying bacon pulled Bren from sleep before dawn. For a moment he lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, and the soft rhythm of his daughter's breathing beside him. Then memory returned. The widow's kindness, the warm meal, the chance of work. He rose carefully so as not to wake Mara and slipped on his boots. In the main room, Lorna was already moving at the stove. Her motions were smooth and practiced. She wore a work dress and apron, her hair neatly pinned back. The table had been set for 3. "Morning," she said without turning. "Coffee's ready. Breakfast won't be long." Bren poured himself a cup, savoring the heat. Real coffee had been a rare thing these past months. "I can start on chores while you finish," he offered. "Eat first," she replied, glancing over her shoulder. "You'll need the strength. Your daughter's still asleep." "Like a stone," he said softly. "First real bed she's had in weeks." Lorna nodded and returned to the skillet. They worked in easy silence until Mara appeared in the doorway, clutching her doll and rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Papa!" "I'm right here, sunshine." Bren opened his arms, and she hurried into them, pressing her face against his shirt. "You hungry?" She nodded against his chest, then peeked shyly toward Lorna. In the early light, she looked even smaller than the night before, her dress hanging loose on her narrow frame. "Good morning, Mara," Lorna said gently. "Would you like some milk with your breakfast?" The girl's eyes widened. "Real milk?" "Fresh from the cow this morning." Mara glanced up at her father as if unsure she was allowed such a thing. He gave a small nod. "Yes, please, ma'am," she whispered. They ate bacon, biscuits, and fried eggs. Bren noticed how Lorna watched the child, not intrusively, but with quiet concern, especially when Mara carefully slipped half her biscuit into her pocket. "There's plenty more," Lorna said softly. "You don't need to save it." Mara's cheeks reddened. "Mama always said not to waste." "She was right," Lorna replied. "But there's a difference between not wasting and going hungry. In this house, you eat until you're full." After breakfast, Bren rose to begin work, but Myra tightened her grip on his hand. "Where are you going, Papa?" "Just outside, helping Lorna with the ranch. You'll be able to see me from the window." "Can I come?" He hesitated, but Lorna spoke before he could answer. "The hen house needs checking for eggs. Think you could help me with that while your papa tends the horses?" Mara bit her lip, torn between staying close to her father and the excitement of being useful. Curiosity won. "I could help," she said quietly. They stepped out into the crisp morning air. Bren paused, taking in the ranch by daylight for the first time. The buildings were solid enough, but everywhere he looked he saw neglect. Leaning fence posts, sagging gates, tools worn thin by overuse. A place this size was too much for one woman alone, especially with winter closing fast. "I'll start with the corral fence," he said. "That corner won't survive another storm." Lorna studied him a moment, measuring more than his words. "Tools are in the barn," she said. "You'll find what you need." They parted, Lorna leading Mara toward the hen house while Bren headed for the barn. Moments later, he heard his daughter's delighted gasp as the first hen yielded a warm egg, her laughter carrying bright and unexpected across the quiet morning. The labor was rough but deeply grounding. As the sun climbed higher, Bren Carson fell into the steady cadence of it, measuring boards, cutting clean lines, driving nails home. His body remembered the work even after months on the road, as if the rhythm had never truly left him. Now and then, he glanced toward the house and caught sight of Mara trailing Lorna Whitell like a small shadow. Near midday they met again, by the water pump. The girl's dress was dusted brown, but her face shone with excitement. "Papa, I gathered 12 whole eggs and 1 cracked one. And Miss Lorna showed me how to scatter corn for the chickens. There's a cat in the barn with kittens." "Sounds like you've had yourself a full morning," Bren said, ruffling her hair. His chest lifted at her bright grin. It had been far too long since he'd seen her smile like that. "Old Abby had her litter 2 weeks back," Lorna added. 5 kittens, all healthy. "Can I see them again after lunch?" Mara asked eagerly. "If Papa says it's all right." Bren nodded, grateful for anything that kept her happy and busy. On the trail, keeping Mara occupied while he worked had always been his greatest worry. Lunch was simple: cold beef, bread, and preserves, shared at the kitchen table. Beside Lorna's plate lay a weathered map, corners curled, dotted with markings. "The north pasture's best for wintering," she explained, tracing a boundary with her finger. "The creek holds longer there. Your husband knew this land well," Bren said carefully. "He did." Her voice stayed steady, though he saw the effort beneath it. "Eamon bought this place 8 years ago with nothing but grit and hope. Turned scrub ground into something worth fighting for." "He'd be proud you're still standing," Bren said. Her laugh came short and sharp. "Standing? I'm barely holding on. Half the town expects me to sell before the first snow." "Will you?" She met his gaze squarely. "Not if I can help it." After the meal, Mara curled up on the hearth rug with one of the kittens Lorna had allowed inside. The cloth doll lay forgotten as the child stroked the tiny creature, whispering to it as though it understood every word. Watching her, Lorna felt the ache in her chest deepen. "Does she remember her mother much?" she asked quietly. Bren paused while cleaning his tools. "Some days more than others. The doll was Alice's. She made it for Mara's 4th birthday." His mouth curved sadly. "She talks to it sometimes. Tells it things she doesn't know how to say out loud." "Children need their secrets," Lorna murmured. "That they do." He hesitated. "Did you and Eamon ever have children?" "No." The word came sharper than she meant. "We tried for years, but the land doesn't give gifts easy out here." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You can't grieve what never came." Yet her eyes lingered on Mara longer than her words admitted. The afternoon brought fresh problems. In the hayloft, Bren found boards rotting beneath the straw, dangerous for anyone who didn't know where to step. The chicken coop doors sagged on failing hinges. Several tool handles were loose, neglected since spring. He worked methodically, sorting urgent needs from those that could wait. By evening, the worst stretch of corral fence stood firm again, and the coop door swung properly once more. His shoulders throbbed with the pleasant ache of honest labor. Supper felt livelier than breakfast. Mara talked nonstop, about kittens, chickens, and the blue curtains in the kitchen window. Her shyness had faded. She spoke to Lorna directly now, instead of hiding behind her father. "Miss Lorna, do you know any stories?" "What kind of stories?" "Mama used to tell me about castles and princes." Her voice dipped. "I can't remember them all anymore." Lorna thought a moment. "I don't know many castle tales, but my grandmother used to tell stories from when the frontier was even wilder than it is now." "Would you like to hear how she chased off a bear with nothing but a rolling pin?" Mara's eyes grew round. "Really?" "Really. She was baking pies for a church social when a big black bear wandered up to her kitchen window." As Lorna spun the tale, Bren watched from across the table. Mara clung to every word, gasping at the danger, giggling when Lorna described flour flying and her grandmother shouting at the bear like it was a misbehaving dog. It was the liveliest Bren had seen her since Alice passed. When the story ended, Mayra yawned so wide it made her eyes water. "That was better than castles," she murmured. "Time for bed, sunshine," Bren said gently. "Will you tell another one tomorrow, Miss Lorna?" she asked as he lifted her. "If you'd like," Lorna replied. As Bren carried his sleepy daughter down the hall, he heard her whisper, "She's nice, Papa. Not like Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house." "No," he said softly. "She's not." When he came back to help clear the dishes, Lorna Whitell lifted a hand to stop him. "You've done enough for one day," she said. "Besides, we need to talk about tomorrow's work." They settled near the fire, its glow flickering across the walls as she laid out what needed tending. Bringing the cattle down from the summer range, counting winter feed, shoring up the barn before the first heavy snow. She exhaled slowly. "It's a lot," she admitted. "Maybe more than one person ought to handle." "It's manageable," Bren Carson replied. "But come spring, you'll need more than a single hand. This land could support a full crew." "Could have," she corrected quietly. "When Eamon was alive, we had plans." She shook her head. "Doesn't matter now. I'll be lucky just to keep it breathing through winter." He studied her. "Why stay? There are easier places for a woman on her own." Lorna stared into the flames. "Have you ever built something with your own hands, Mr. Carson? Poured sweat and hope into every fence post, every acre?" She swallowed. "I have. This land holds pieces of us, Eamon and me. Leaving would feel like selling his grave." The fire popped softly. Outside, the wind rose again. After a while, Bren stood. "Best get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be long." "Bren," she said, lifting her eyes to his. "Thank you. Not just for the work, but for bringing laughter back into this house." "And thank you," he answered, "for giving us a chance." Later, as he prepared for sleep, Bren thought over the day. He had labored harder on other ranches, served under tougher men. Yet something about this place felt different. Two wounded souls working side by side, trying to keep something alive. It felt fragile, precious, like the first green shoots after a brutal winter. In the small room, Mayra stirred. "Papa?" "Yes." "Sunshine. Do you think Mama can see us from heaven?" His throat tightened. "I'm sure she can." "Good," she murmured. "I wanted her to know we found a nice place, with kittens and stories and everything." "I think she knows," he said softly. Mayra drifted back to sleep, one small hand reaching for his arm, as if to reassure herself he was still there. Bren lay awake longer, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, the house settling, coyotes calling far off, the wind whispering through cottonwoods. Through the thin wall, he heard Lorna moving, banking the fire, checking the doors. The quiet rituals of someone used to ending each night alone. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the house held more than one lonely soul. It wasn't healing, not yet. But it was the first step toward it. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but for now they were safe, fed, and sheltered. On the frontier, sometimes that was miracle enough. The first week passed in a blur of dawn to dusk labor. Each morning, Bren rose before sunrise, finding coffee already brewing, and Lorna bent over her ledgers, weighing feed costs against thinning funds. He came to respect her efficiency. The way necessity had taught her to waste nothing, not even movement. What surprised him more was her patience with Mayra. The child flourished under Lorna's steady kindness, trailing her through the house like a loyal pup. Where once she'd been withdrawn and quiet, now she chattered freely, eager to help and learn. "See how I hold the needle?" Lorna said one evening, guiding Mayra's hands as they mended a torn apron. "Small stitches, close together, that's what keeps cloth strong." Mayra's tongue stuck out in concentration. "Like this?" "Just like that." Bren watched from across the room, pretending to oil a harness while something warm swelled in his chest. Alice had always meant to teach their daughter such things. Illness had stolen that chance. Now Lorna was filling the space without being asked, without expectation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The next morning would bring the true test of his skills. 300 head of cattle still grazed in the high summer range, and they needed to be brought down before the weather turned cruel. It was the kind of job that usually took 3 or 4 men. "We'll have to move them in stages," Lorna Whittle said, studying the land from her saddle. 50 head at a time, any more and they'll scatter." "I've got another thought," Bren Carson replied. "Mayra's been riding since she could walk." Lorna frowned slightly. "She's just a child. Out here, children either learn fast or they don't last," he said gently. "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't trust her. She knows cattle, and she needs to feel useful, not just tagging along." After a long pause, Lorna nodded. "If you believe it's safe." When they told Mayra, her face lit up brighter than Christmas morning. "Really, Papa? I get to help with the real work?" "Real work comes with real responsibility," Bren warned. "You listen to everything Miss Lorna and I tell you. Understand?" "Yes, Papa." They saddled 3 horses. Lorna found an old youth saddle in the barn that fit Mayra perfectly. As they rode out, Bren felt an old rhythm return, the creak of leather, the sway beneath him, the endless sky stretched wide above. This was the life he understood, the life he had once planned with Alice, before fever stole her away. The cattle were scattered across a broad meadow, fat and slow from rich summer grass. At Bren's direction, they fanned out. He took the left flank, Lorna the right, while Mayra rode center as the sweep. "Easy now, sunshine," Bren called. "Stay calm. They feel what you feel." What followed was a dance as old as the West itself. They started slow, letting the herd grow accustomed to their presence. Then, with quiet pressure, they began easing the cattle down slope. Mayra proved herself quickly. She watched the herd with sharp eyes, anticipating which animals might break away and moving to block them before trouble started. "She's got good instincts," Lorna said during a brief rest. "Her mother's gift," Bren replied. "Alice could gentle the wildest horse just by talking to it." They worked through the long hours, driving group after group toward the lower pastures. By late afternoon, more than half the herd had been moved. Mayra had grown quieter, but she never complained, never once asked to stop. "That's enough for today," Lorna finally said. "We'll finish tomorrow." On the ride back, Bren noticed his daughter swaying slightly in the saddle. He eased his horse closer, ready to catch her if she slipped. She straightened stubbornly, gripping the reins. "Did I do good, Papa?" she asked as they unsaddled. "You did better than good," he said with pride. "You worked like a professional today." Lorna returned with a tin cup of water, then placed a silver dollar in Mayra's palm. "Fair wages for fair work," she said solemnly. Mayra stared at the coin as if it were enchanted. "My very own dollar?" "Your very own," Lorna said. "You earned it." That night, Mayra could barely keep her eyes open through supper. But she clutched the coin tightly, pulling it out now and then to admire it in the lamplight. What will you do with your wages? Lorna asked. Save it, Mayra answered at once. Papa says saving's important. A smart girl, Lorna said with a smile. Though sometimes it's good to buy something special too. Something just for you. After Mayra was carried off to bed, exhausted but glowing, Bren found Lorna on the porch, watching the stars break through the darkness. You didn't have to pay her, he said, taking a seat beside her. Yes, I did, she replied. She worked as hard as any hand I've hired, harder than some. She paused. Children need to know their worth, especially girls. Too many grow up believing their value comes from what others give them, not what they earn. Speaking from experience? My father was a good man, she said softly, but old-fashioned. Thought teaching me to read was education enough for a woman. A crooked smile touched her lips. Eamon had to teach me numbers and accounts after we married. Said a rancher's wife needed to understand the business same as any man. Sounds like he was ahead of his time. He was ahead of mine, she said quietly. I fought him on it at first. Thought he was criticizing my father. Took me a while to realize he was trying to make sure I'd never be helpless. A good man. The best, she said fiercely, then softer. He would have liked your daughter. Always said this place needed children's laughter. They sat in easy silence, watching bats flicker through the night air as the stars brightened overhead. From the yard, Bren Carson could see the warm glow of firelight spilling through the cabin window. It looked like comfort, real comfort, the kind a man forgot existed after too many nights on the road. It startled him how quickly they had slipped into a shared rhythm. Work at dawn, meals together, stories at night, quiet moments that felt almost like family. Almost. He didn't dare call it that. The following days unfolded much the same. The rest of the cattle were brought down safely. And with every passing hour, Mayra grew more confident. She wore her silver dollar on a string around her neck, tucked beneath her dress. Yet her fingers touched it often, as if to reassure herself it was still real. One afternoon, while Bren repaired harness straps in the barn, laughter drifted from the house. True laughter, bright and unguarded. Both Lorna Weidl's voice and his daughter's. He paused, letting the sound settle over him. When was the last time Mayra had laughed like that? Not since before Elise fell sick. He found them in the kitchen, flour dusting the table, the floor, and both their faces. Papa! Mayra cried. We're making bread, real bread, not hardtack. He took in the chaos and smiled faintly. Looks like the flour's winning. Bread is always a battle, Lorna said solemnly, a white streak across her cheek. Sometimes you win. Sometimes the dough does. They showed him how to knead it properly, Mayra's small hands working beside Lorna's stronger ones. The room filled with warmth and the yeasty scent of rising dough. For a while, Bren forgot loss, wandering, and the uncertainty ahead. There was only this: his daughter's joy, Lorna's patient guidance, and the simple comfort of creating something nourishing together. That evening, as they ate the bread still warm with butter and honey, Mayra declared it the best thing she had ever tasted. Because we made it together, she said with great seriousness. Things are always better when you make them with people you... She stopped, suddenly shy, glancing between her father and Lorna. With people you care about, Lorna finished gently. Yes, Mayra nodded. That. Later, as Bren tucked his daughter into bed, she asked the question he'd been dreading. Papa, are we staying here forever? He brushed her hair back carefully. I don't know, sunshine. We're here for now, and that's what matters. I want to stay, she said firmly. Miss Lorna needs us, and we need her too, don't we? From the mouths of children, he thought. Sleep now, he said softly. Tomorrow's another big day. But she wasn't finished. Papa, do you think Mama would like Miss Lorna? His throat tightened. I think she would. Very much. Good, Mayra murmured. Because I like her too. She doesn't try to be Mama, but she teaches me things Mama would have wanted me to know. Her eyes fluttered closed. That's good, he whispered. That's very good. When Bren returned to the main room, he found Lorna mending one of Mayra's dresses, letting the hem down with careful stitches. She's growing, Lorna said without looking up. Children do that, even when times are hard. Lorna. He stopped, unsure what he meant to say. Thank you felt too small. The past week had shown him something he'd believed lost forever. The possibility of belonging somewhere again. She glanced up, reading his hesitation. I know, she said simply. I feel it too. What do we do about it? We take each day as it comes, she replied. Winter's coming. There's work to be done. Her eyes dropped back to the fabric. The rest, it'll sort itself out. Or it won't. Practical words, but her hands trembled slightly. Bren understood. They were both walking wounded, afraid to hope too quickly. Yet something was forming between the three of them. Fragile as first ice, strengthening a little more each day. I'll bring in more firewood, he said, needing motion to steady his thoughts. Outside, stars spilled across the sky in reckless abundance. Cattle lowed softly in the near pasture. Horses shifted in the barn. His daughter slept warm and full, learning and growing under the care of a good woman. He had honest work, fair wages, and the respect of someone he admired more with every sunrise. It wasn't the life he'd planned with Alice, but it was a life nonetheless. And for the first time since her death, that felt like enough. When he returned with the wood, Lorna had set aside her sewing and was writing in her ledger. She looked up, and something passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but an understanding. Bren, she said, and he realized it was the first time she'd spoken his name without the shield of formality. I'm glad you knocked on my door that night. So am I, he answered quietly. More than I can say. The morning Ketch Rollins arrived began like any other. Frost silvered the grass. Bren was already in the barn, cleaning stalls, while Mayra scattered grain for the chickens. Lorna had just stepped onto the porch with her coffee when she saw riders approaching. 3 men moving slow and deliberate. The kind of men who wanted to be noticed. Bren, Lorna called, keeping her voice level despite the chill crawling up her spine. He stepped out of the barn with a pitchfork in hand and followed her gaze. The moment he saw the riders, his jaw tightened. Mayra, go inside. But Papa, I'm not done. Inside. Now. Something in his voice cut through her protest. She hurried past Lorna, who rested a steady hand on the girl's shoulder before the door shut behind her. The riders halted just beyond the fence. The man at their head was broad-shouldered, with pale eyes and a scar that dragged one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer. The 2 men behind him had the look of hired fists, men who enjoyed intimidation a little too much. Mrs. Whittell, the scarred man said, tipping his hat with false courtesy. Name's Ketch Rollins. I'm here representing Garrick Warren's interests. I know exactly who you are, Lorna replied coolly. State your business. Rollins' eyes slid to Bren, who had moved to stand beside her. Picked yourself up a new hand, I see. Mighty quick after your husband passed. My hiring choices are none of your concern. Everything on this range is Mr. Warren's concern, Rollins said as he dismounted, his men following. Especially when your cattle keep wandering onto his land. Found near a dozen head with your brand drinking his water yesterday. That's not possible, Lorna said sharply. We moved the herd to lower pasture last week. Rollins' smile thinned. You calling me a liar, Mrs. Whittle? Bren stepped forward. She's saying you're mistaken. Rollins studied him. And you are? The hired hand, Bren said evenly. Like the lady said. Their eyes locked. Lorna saw something flicker across Rollins' face. Not recognition exactly, but caution. Men who lived by violence often sensed it in others. Cattle cross fences, Bren continued calmly. It happens. We'll ride out today. Check the lines. Bring back any strays. No harm done. No harm? Rollins chuckled. The sound ugly. Mr. Warren's patience is wearing thin. Third time this year. He's starting to think maybe Mrs. Whitell can't manage a spread this size. Lorna lifted her chin. I'm not selling. Not yet, Rollins said. But winter's coming. Accidents happen. Cattle die. Barns burn. His gaze lingered deliberately. Ranching alone can be dangerous. The threat hung thick as smoke. Bren's hand drifted closer to his side, though he carried no gun. That sounds like a threat, he said quietly. Just an observation, Rollins replied. Frontier life is harsh. Mr. Warren would hate to see trouble come to such a vulnerable operation. His eyes shifted toward the house. For a brief second, Mayra's face appeared at the window. Bren went utterly still. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, too soft. You're right. It is dangerous country. Men disappear out here all the time, fall off their horses at night, get lost in snowstorms. He smiled faintly. Sometimes they threaten the wrong folks and never find their way back. Rollins' hand twitched toward his gun, then stopped. Of course, Bren added pleasantly. You're just here about cattle. Neighborly concern. We appreciate it. His eyes, however, were cold as riverstone. Tell Mr. Warren we'll check the fences today. Any strays will be returned. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rollins stepped back. Something close to respect flickered in his pale gaze. See that they are, he said. Mr. Warren's generosity has limits. They mounted and rode off. But Rollins turned once more in the saddle, his eyes finding Bren. You look familiar, friend? Sure we haven't met? Doubt it, Bren replied. I'm just a drifter working for wages. Rollins snorted. Funny, you don't sit a horse like a drifter. With that, he wheeled his mount and followed his men. Only when they disappeared over the rise did Lorna realize she was trembling. Bren gently took her elbow and guided her inside, where Mayra waited, wide-eyed. Who were those men, Papa? Nobody important, Sunshine, he said calmly. Why don't you go check on the kittens? She hesitated, then nodded and hurried away. Lorna sank into a chair the moment she was gone. He threatened her, she whispered. He threatened Mayra. He threatened all of us, Bren said. He poured her coffee with steady hands, though the tension stood out in his shoulders like drawn wire. Tell me about Garrick Warren, he said quietly. Garrick Warren owned the largest spread in the territory. 3,000 head of cattle, maybe more. He'd been swallowing smaller ranches for years, by whatever methods proved effective. Lorna wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. drawing comfort from the warmth. Eamon always said Warren had his eye on our water rights, she said quietly. We've got the only year-round stream for miles. With Eamon gone, he figures I'm easy prey. She exhaled slowly. He made offers, big ones. Looked generous on paper. Her mouth tightened. When I refused, that's when the trouble started. She gestured toward the door. Cut fences, spooked cattle, just enough damage to scare me, but never enough to prove anything. Bren was silent for a long moment. Rollins recognized something in me, he said finally. And he wasn't wrong. Lorna looked up, sensing the weight behind his words. I wasn't always a ranch hand, he continued. I used to wear a badge, deputy marshal in Kansas, before Mara was born. I was good at it. Maybe too good. He stared into his coffee, as if it held ghosts. I made enemies. One of them came from me at home. Alice was... His voice faltered. He swallowed hard. She was alone with the baby. Lorna's breath caught. She stepped between him and the gun. By the time I got there, his jaw tightened. I killed the man who shot her, and when it was over, I felt nothing. Just hollow. Oh, Bren. I turned in my badge the next morning, he went on. Took my daughter and left. Been running ever since. From what I was. From what I'd done. Lorna reached across the table and laid her hand over his. You protected your family, she said gently. There's no shame in that. His hand turned beneath hers, fingers threading together. I didn't protect them well enough, he said quietly. But I won't fail again. If Warren wants this ranch, he'll have to go through me. This isn't your fight, she whispered. Isn't it? He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Mara hadn't smiled in months before we came here. Now she's laughing again, learning, being a child. His eyes lifted to hers. You gave her that. You gave her back something I couldn't. You think I'll let anyone threaten it? They sat in silence, hands clasped across the table. At last, Lorna spoke. What do we do? First, we check those fences like I promised, Bren said. Then we prepare. Men like Warren don't rush. They test. Look for weakness before they strike. A grim smile touched his mouth. Lucky for us, I know how men like him think. They spent the day riding the property lines. Just as Bren suspected, the fences were intact. No breaks, no neglect. But they found tracks, hoof prints leading cattle across the boundary, then back again, leaving just enough evidence to support Rollins' claim. Clever, Bren muttered. Makes it look like carelessness. Eamon always said Warren was patient as a spider, Lorna replied. They repaired a few weak posts, anyway. More to show diligence than from true necessity. As they worked, Bren found himself watching her. The way she handled tools, the ease with a horse. She had been shaped by this land, hardened by it, but not broken. That evening, while Mara played with the kittens in the barn, Bren cleaned his rifle and the old coat he'd found stored away. Still serviceable. Lorna watched from the doorway. I hate this, she said softly. The waiting. The fear that something terrible is coming. Eamon tried to shield me from it, but I always knew it was there. That's frontier life, Bren said. The strong take from the weak, unless the weak get smart or lucky, or both. She met his eyes in the glow of the setting sun. Which are we? He didn't hesitate. We're not weak. Not anymore. That night, Bren moved his bedroll into the main room, positioning himself between the front door and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. If trouble came, it would reach him first. Mayra sensed the tension despite their efforts to hide it. She clung to him at bedtime. "Papa, are the bad men coming back?" "Maybe," he said gently. "But that's not your worry." "Why not?" He brushed her hair from her face. "Because that's my job. Your job is to sleep tight and dream good dreams." She thought about this. "Will you protect Mrs. Lorna too?" "I'll protect everyone in this house." She nodded solemnly. "Good," she said, "because I think she's our family now." Bren closed his eyes for a moment, then pulled her close, and for the first time since the trouble began, the word family didn't feel like something he'd lost, but something he might still be allowed to keep. "Isn't she?" Bren's throat tightened. From the hallway, he heard Lorna draw in a sharp breath. "What makes you say that, sunshine?" he asked gently. "She takes care of us," Mayra said simply. "And we take care of her. That's what families do." Her voice carried the quiet certainty only children possessed. "Mama would understand," she added after a pause. "She always said hearts don't get smaller when you love more people. They get bigger." When the child finally drifted into sleep, Bren stepped back into the main room. Lorna stood by the window, moonlight catching the tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "She's right," Lorna whispered. "Somewhere between that first night and now, you both became necessary to me." She swallowed. "I've been so afraid of dishonoring Eamon by moving forward. But I think," her voice trembled, "I think he'd hate seeing me alone more than anything." A soft, broken smile touched her lips. "He used to say I had too much love for only one person anyway." Bren crossed the room and gently cupped her face, brushing away the tears with his thumb. "We're the same," he said quietly. "You and me. Trying to learn how to live again after loss." She leaned into his hand. "Maybe," he continued, "we figure it out together. Even with Garrick Warren breathing down our necks?" "Especially with that," he replied. "Nothing worth keeping comes easy out here." She nodded, then looked up at him with sudden intensity. "Promise me something." "Anything. No matter what happens, we protect Mayra first. She's innocent in all this." "I swear it," Bren said. "I'll protect you both or die trying." "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare leave us now that we've found you." He pulled her into his arms, and she went without hesitation, fitting against him as if the shape had always been meant that way. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the sharp scent of approaching snow and harder days ahead. But for now, they stood together. A family pieced together from grief and need, and the stubborn hope that refused to die, even in unforgiving soil. Mayra smiled in her sleep. And in the main room, two wounded souls held one another and began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they had found their way home. Morning came cold and bright, the sky clean and sharp. 3 days had passed since Ketch Rollins' visit. 3 days of watching and waiting. Today, Bren chose action. "We're riding up the canyon," he said over breakfast, "going after the strays." Mayra's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Me too." "Yes," he said firmly. "I won't leave you behind, and we'll need every hand." Lorna understood at once. Keeping Mayra close was safer than leaving her alone at the ranch. "I'll pack food," she said. "It'll be a long day." They rode out after chores. 3 figures against the wide land. Mayra rode between them on her gentle mare, back straight with pride. She'd begun braiding her hair the same way Lorna did, and Bren felt his chest tighten at how naturally the child mirrored the woman who had become her anchor. The canyon country opened before them. Red stone, twisted juniper, winding paths cut by time. They went this way, Lorna said, pointing to fresh tracks. They followed the trail deeper, the canyon walls rising high like cathedral pillars. Beautiful land. Dangerous land. Stay close, sunshine, Bren warned as Mayra's mare drifted toward a patch of wildflowers. They found the cattle near a hidden spring, grazing peacefully in a narrow meadow. Bren studied the brands. Some were theirs. Others bore Garrick Warren's mark. Well, he muttered, looks like our cattle weren't the only ones encouraged to wander. Or someone wanted them mixed, Lorna said quietly. So it would look like theft. They worked carefully, separating the herds with the easy rhythm they'd learned together. Once again, Mayra proved herself, blocking nervous animals, keeping them from scattering while the adults sorted brands. Near midday, they rested by the spring. They spread a blanket beneath an overhanging rock, sheltered from the wind. Tell me a story, Mrs. Lorna, Mayra asked through a mouthful of biscuit. Lorna smiled. When I was your age, I lived in Ohio, she began. Flat land, no mountains at all. I used to dream about places like this. Is that why you came west? Partly, she said. Then she glanced at Bren. But mostly because life brought me here. She paused. Sometimes the best things find us when we aren't looking. As Lorna spoke of her childhood, Bren watched his daughter lean closer, eyes shining, hanging on every word, and felt something steady take root in his chest. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel empty, only uncertain and full of possibility. Lorna's face came alive as she spoke, lit with memory and dry humor. Sunlight slipped through the canyon walls, scattering gold and shadow across the ground. For a little while, the threats waiting back home felt far away, small, almost unreal. Papa's not listening, Mayra accused, catching his distant look. I am listening, Bren said quickly. Just thinking. About what? About how lucky we are to be here, he said. Right now. Together. Mayra mulled that over with the gravity only a child could manage. Mama used to say that, she murmured. She said we should hold tight to the good moments. They help us survive the bad ones. Your mama was a wise woman, Lorna said softly. She would have liked you. Mayra nodded with certainty. She would have liked you too. You both understand important things. After lunch, they started pushing the cattle back toward home. The herd moved slow and stubborn, and the afternoon shadows stretched long across the rock. They were nearing familiar ground when Bren stiffened in the saddle. Dust, he said quietly. Riders. Lorna followed his gaze. Take Mayra and the cattle into that draw, he said. Stay out of sight. Bren, please, just until I know who it is. She didn't argue. The tone in his voice left no room for it. Come on, sweet pea, she told Mayra. Let's water the horses while your papa scouts ahead. Bren rode for higher ground, using a stand of pines as cover. 5 riders came into view, moving hard, but not worn riders. Relief eased through him. He recognized Orrin Vale in the lead, a broad-shouldered rancher who had always dealt fair with Eamon. Bren rode into the open. Vale raised a hand in greeting. Carson, he called. We were headed for your place. Glad we found you. What's wrong? Bren asked. Barbed wire, Vale said grimly. Someone strung it across Miller's Creek, right on the old cattle trail. Cal Mercer's boy nearly killed his horse running into it last night. Bren cursed under his breath. Barbed wire across open range was a provocation, one that could start bloodshed. Warren, Bren said. Has to be. Only one bold enough, Vale agreed. He's trying to choke off water access, force folks to sell or move. Where's Mrs. Whitell? Another man asked. Safe, Bren replied. He whistled sharply, the signal. Lorna emerged from the draw with Mayra, guiding the small herd forward. The men tipped their hats respectfully. Ma'am, Vale said. Sorry to bring trouble, but this concerns every one of us. What threatens one ranch threatens us all, Lorna said without hesitation. That's always been the rule out here. Night settled before anyone could reach town, so they made camp. A rope corral went up, and soon the smell of coffee and beans drifted through the cool air. Mayra, thrilled by the company, helped serve supper, carrying plates with careful pride. The men, rough-handed and dust-worn, treated her with surprising gentleness, thanking her solemnly. Your girl's a born rancher, Vale told Bren. Saw her working cattle earlier. Reminded me of my own at that age. Around the fire, the talk turned serious. This ain't just harassment, one man said. It's a declaration. He's trying to end open range. We could cut the wire, another muttered. Done it before. And give the law reason to come down on us, someone else argued. Warren's probably counting on that. Bren stared into the flames. What we need, he said slowly, is to make this more expensive than it's worth. The men looked at him. Warren's a businessman. Hit his pocket, he'll think twice. How? Unity, Bren said. We stop standing alone. We share resources. Back each other up. He looked around the circle. How many small outfits between here and town? 15? 20 if you count the little spreads? Nods followed. That's enough to matter. We pool supply orders so Warren can't squeeze us through merchants he controls. We formalize shared water access, legal papers. Make it impossible for him to pick us off one by one. Vale rubbed his chin. That'll take trust. They'll trust each other quicker than they'll trust a man trying to steal their land, Lorna said firmly. She lifted her chin. Eamon always said the small ranchers would only survive if they stood together. Maybe that time is now. The fire crackled. Around it sat men who had spent their lives standing alone, and who were beginning to realize that alone might no longer be enough. The talk carried on deep into the night. Mayra eventually drifted to sleep against Lorna's shoulder, her small body warm and heavy with trust. Bren watched as Lorna shifted carefully, easing the child into a more comfortable position and drawing a blanket over her without waking her. The movement was instinctive, gentle, practiced, deeply maternal. It tightened something in his chest. You've done well for yourself, Carson, Orrin Vale said quietly from across the fire. That widow of yours is a fine woman, and that little girl clearly loves her. Bren cleared his throat. I work for her. Vale's mouth curved knowingly. Sure you do. And I'm the King of England. Then his tone turned serious. Don't wait too long, friend. Good things don't last out here unless someone's willing to fight to keep them. One by one, the men bedded down, rolling into their blankets beneath the stars until Bren was left on watch. Lorna remained beside him, Mayra still asleep in her arms. We should move her to her bedroll, he whispered. Let her be, Lorna replied softly. She's comfortable. She brushed Mayra's hair back with tender fingers. She was brave today. You've raised her well, Bren said. I've just tried to keep her alive, he added quietly. You're teaching her how to live. They sat in silence, the night breathing around them. The distant yip of coyotes, wind sliding through tall grass, the occasional stamp and snort of restless horses. The fire burned low, throwing slow-moving shadows across the canyon walls. "What you said earlier," Lorna murmured, "about unity. It could work, but Garrick Warren won't accept it quietly." "No," Bren said. "Things will likely get worse before they get better." She looked at him across the dying embers. "I'm not afraid anymore." He met her gaze. "Having something worth protecting changes everything." "Yes," he said softly. "It does." Mara stirred, mumbling something about angels and horses. Lorna soothed her with whispered reassurances, gentle as a lullaby. Watching them, Bren felt that familiar ache again. The dangerous, beautiful possibility of a future he'd believed was gone forever. In the morning, they would return to the ranch and begin organizing resistance to Garrick Warren's ambitions. There would be hardship, violence perhaps. But tonight, beneath the wide blanket of stars, with his daughter safe in Lorna's arms and good men ready to stand together, Bren allowed himself to hope. The fire popped, sparks spiraling upward like prayers. Somewhere in the darkness, a nightbird cried out, and another answered. Even in wild country, no voice ever truly had to be alone. "I should wake Oren for his watch," Bren said at last. "In a minute," Lorna replied. Her hand still rested protectively on Mara's hair. "Let's just stay here a little longer." So they did. 3 lives bound together by loss, courage, and the quiet determination to protect what they'd found in one another. Tomorrow would bring its trials. But tonight, they had warmth, safety, and the unspoken certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The smell of smoke tore Bren from a dead sleep. For a heartbeat, he lay still, trying to place it. Not the familiar scent of a hearth, but something sharp, bitter, wrong. Then came the sound, cattle bawling in terror, the violent crackle of burning wood. Fire! He was on his feet instantly, dragging on his boots. "Lorna, the barn!" She burst from the bedroom already dressed, her face pale but resolute. "Mara, I'll get her. You start the water buckets." But Mara was already awake, clutching her doll, eyes wide and glistening. "Papa, what's happening?" "Stay with Mrs. Lorna," Bren said firmly. "Do exactly what she tells you." He grabbed his coat and rifle. "No matter what, you stay with her." Outside, the night blazed orange. The west wall of the barn was fully engulfed, flames devouring the dry timber with savage hunger. Horses screamed inside, panicked and trapped. In the nearby corral, cattle slammed against the rails, desperate to flee. "The horses first!" Lorna shouted over the roar. She had already begun hauling buckets from the pump, though they both knew water alone wouldn't stop a fire this fierce. Bren plunged into the smoke-choked barn. The heat struck him like a hammer, but he pushed forward anyway. Bren kicked open the stall doors. The horses didn't hesitate. Terror drove them forward the instant they were free. They burst past him into the night, hooves pounding. He counted automatically. 1, 2, 3. His heart lurched. Where's the 4th? Through the choking smoke, he spotted her. Mara's gentle mare pressed tight against the back wall, trembling too hard to move. Bren snatched a blanket, threw it over the animal's head, and slapped her flank. "Go!" The mare surged forward, coughing, stumbling, but alive. "Papa!" Mara's scream cut through the roar of flames. She broke free from Lorna and ran toward him. "Buttercup." "She's safe, baby," Bren said urgently, pushing the reins into her hands. "She's safe." Then the roof groaned. Burning beams collapsed inward, showering sparks like falling stars. The barn was lost. Nothing could save it now. The only hope was stopping the fire from reaching the house. "The cattle!" Lorna shouted, pointing toward the corral. One section of fence had already given way. Panicked animals poured through the break, scattering in every direction, some charging straight toward the flames. Together, they ran headlong into danger, shouting, waving coats, forcing the herd to turn. A terrified steer nearly trampled Lorna before Bren yanked her clear. 300 pounds of fear cared nothing for human lives. At last, they managed to drive the animals away from the buildings. When it was over, they stood gasping, faces blackened, clothes scorched. The barn collapsed in on itself with a thunderous roar. Mara pressed against Bren's side, tears carving clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. "My kittens," she whispered. "They were in there." Lorna dropped to her knees and pulled her close. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." At dawn, the truth stood bare in the cold light. The barn was nothing but ash. Most of the winter feed was gone. Tools, tack, lost. Several cattle were injured, and at least a dozen had vanished into the dark during the stampede. Bren walked the perimeter slowly, reading the ground like a page he already understood. Hoof prints led away from the ruins. A burned torch lay discarded nearby. "This wasn't an accident," he said. Lorna joined him. "Worn riders?" "Without question." He held up the torch. "They wanted us to know." Her jaw hardened. "A warning." "Yes. This is what happens when you don't fall in line. Then we rebuild," she said fiercely. "With what?" Bren asked gently. "Winter's coming, without feed, without shelter." He didn't finish. They both knew what it meant. "We'll find a way," she said, but her voice trembled. By midday, neighbors began arriving, drawn by the smoke still curling into the sky. Orrin Vale was among the first. He surveyed the ruins, his face dark. "This changes things," he said. "Burning out a widow and a child." Warren crossed a line. "What good does that do me?" Lorna asked bitterly. "My barn's still gone, my cattle still scattered." "It means you're not alone anymore," Vale replied. He turned to the growing crowd. "If they'll do this to Lorna Whitell, none of us are safe. I say we stop talking and start acting." A low murmur rolled through the ranchers. These were people who'd survived droughts, blizzards, raids, and ruin. They knew one truth above all others. You lived together, or you didn't live at all. "My boys will help track your scattered cattle," one man said. "I've got extra feed stored," another added. "Not enough for winter, but it'll help." "We'll raise a new barn," Vale declared. "All of us. Let Warren see that burning one ranch only makes the rest stronger." Tears finally spilled from Lorna's eyes, the first since the fire. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you." As the men organized search parties, Bren noticed Mara sitting alone near the ruins, clutching her doll. He sat beside her and lifted her onto his lap. "I know it hurts, Sunshine." "It's not fair," she said in a small, broken voice. "They were just babies. They never hurt anyone." "No," he said softly. "It isn't fair. Bad people hurt innocent things to make a point." She looked up at him. "Will they come back? Will they burn our house too?" His arms tightened around her. "Not if I can help it." She thought for a moment, then said quietly, "You can't stay awake forever, Papa. Even you have to sleep sometimes." The truth struck him hard. One man couldn't protect them alone. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. That evening, As the sun bled red over the blackened ruins, wagons began rolling in from neighboring ranches, loaded with lumber, tools, sacks of grain. Women arrived with food, blankets, coffee. What had burned in the night was not the end. It was the beginning of something stronger. Men arrived with tools slung over their shoulders and determination in their eyes. By nightfall, the yard had transformed into a rough tent camp, lanterns flickering in the dark like watchful stars. "We'll start at first light," Vale announced. "Frame first, then walls. If we keep moving, we'll have the structure standing in 2 days." Lorna stood before them, searching for words that would not come. "I don't know how to thank you," she said at last. "No thanks needed," an older woman replied firmly. "Today it's your barn. Tomorrow it could be mine." She lifted her chin. "That's how folks survive out here, together or not at all." As night settled in, Bren took his watch again. This time, he wasn't alone. Men rotated shifts, rifles close at hand, eyes scanning the dark. The message to Garrick Warren was unmistakable. The small ranches would no longer be taken one by one. Lorna joined Bren by the low fire and handed him a cup of coffee. "I've never seen anything like this," she said quietly. "All these people standing together. It's what Eamon would have wanted," she added after a pause. "He believed in this kind of unity." She looked at Bren. "He would have respected you for what you're doing." "I'm just trying to keep us safe," Bren replied. She shook her head. "It's more than that. You've given them courage. You've reminded them they don't have to bow." Her voice softened. "You've given me hope too." Before he could answer, a shout rose from the perimeter. "Riders!" Bren was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. But as the figures entered the firelight, he recognized them. Not worn riders. Sheriff Doran Kincaid rode at the front, flanked by 2 deputies. The lawman dismounted slowly, eyes sweeping over the burned barn, the gathered ranchers, the armed watches. "Mrs. Whittle," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard you had trouble." "Our barn was burned," Lorna said steadily. "On purpose." "That's a serious charge," Kincaid replied. "You have proof?" Bren stepped forward. "Torch remains, tracks leading off. Hard to miss." The sheriff studied him. "You're the new hand. Carson, right? Heard you once wore a badge." "Once," Bren said. "Now I work cattle." Kincaid nodded and swung down fully from his saddle. "I'll need to look into this. Can't have folks taking the law into their own hands." "Cuts both ways," Bren replied calmly. The warning hung in the air. Kincaid's tone remained even, careful, measured. "Rebuilding a barn isn't illegal," Vale said. "Neighbors helping neighbors." "No," the sheriff agreed. "It isn't." He walked through the camp slowly, making certain every man saw him. "But hear this clearly. I'll enforce the law the same for everyone. No vigilante justice, no matter how justified it feels." "We understand," the ranchers replied as one. They knew the rules now. Stay lawful. Give Kincaid no reason to turn against them. As the sheriff prepared to leave, he paused beside Bren. "Heard you were quick with a gun back in Kansas." "I was better at keeping the peace," Bren answered. "Still am." Kincaid's voice dropped. "Warren's got money and reach, but he's not the only power in this territory. When it comes down to it, the law has to mean something, or we're all just beasts fighting over dirt." Then he mounted and rode away. Afterward, the camp grew quiet, but resolute. The lines had been drawn. Tomorrow they would raise a barn, not only to replace what was lost, but to show they would not be driven out by fire and fear. Mara had finally fallen asleep in Lorna's bed, exhausted by terror and grief. Bren checked on her, smoothing her hair gently. In sleep, she looked painfully small. "We'll protect her," Lorna said from the doorway. "All of us. She's already lost too much. Nothing will happen to her," Bren said fiercely. "Not while I'm breathing." Lorna hesitated, then spoke softly. "She's become like my own." She searched his face. "I hope that doesn't overstep." Bren turned toward her fully. "You could never overstep." "You've given her what I never could," Bren said quietly. "A mother's love. I see it every day, in 1,000 small moments." He took a breath. "And you gave me purpose again. A reason to fight for this land beyond stubborn pride." Lorna stepped closer, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Whatever comes next, we face it as a family. The three of us." He kissed her then, gentle, certain. Not a desperate act, not a question, but a promise sealed without words. When they pulled apart, her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "We'll rebuild," she whispered. "The barn, the herd, all of it. And Garrick Warren will learn," Bren said softly, "that some things can't be burned away." Outside, the guards kept watch while neighbors slept beneath the open sky, ready to rise with dawn and build something stronger from ash. The war for the range had begun in earnest, but for the first time, the small ranchers carried hope. Inside the house, a family forged by loss held close, drawing strength from shared breath and steady hands, knowing that tomorrow they would not stand alone. The new barn rose proud against the evening sky, fresh-cut timber glowing gold in the last light. 3 days of shared labor had shaped it, stronger, wider, better than the one before. As families departed, they promised to take turns riding night watch, forming a living chain of protection across the valley. 2 weeks passed in guarded calm. The scattered cattle were recovered. Winter feed was secured. Life settled into a careful rhythm. But Bren felt it in his bones. Garrick Warren had gone silent. And in Bren's experience, dangerous men were never more lethal than when they were planning. The trap was sprung on a moonless night in late October. Bren woke to the sound of horses. Too many, moving too slow to be friendly. He slid from his bedroll in the main room, checked the loads in his rifle and pistol, then moved quickly to Lorna. "They're here," he whispered. "Get Mara to the root cellar." She was awake instantly, frontier trained. No questions. No panic, only motion. As she rushed to her daughter, Bren took position by the window. 8 riders at least, spreading wide to box the house in. "Why tell?" Ketch Rollins' voice rang across the yard. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like," he called, "and nobody gets hurt." Bren answered calmly, "State your business." Rollins laughed. "Got a warrant says you've been stealing Garrick Warren's cattle. Sheriff wants you brought in for questioning." "In the middle of the night," Bren replied, "with 8 armed men? Try again." "Well now," Rollins said easily, "can't fault a man for trying the simple way first." His tone hardened. "You come out or we come in. Either way, you're leaving that house." Lorna appeared beside Bren. "Mara's safe," she said. "What's the plan?" "They want me," he said. "I draw them off." "Absolutely not." Her voice cut like iron. "We stand together." Before he could argue, a new sound reached them. More horses, fast and many. Rollins' men shifted uneasily. Then Orrin Vale's voice rolled through the darkness. "Evenin', Ketch. Bit late for a friendly visit, don't you think?" Bren peered out. A dozen riders at least, neighbors answering a signal agreed upon weeks earlier. And with them rode Sheriff Doran Kincaid, his badge catching the lantern light. "This is lawful business, Vale," Rollins snapped. "That's where you're mistaken," Vale replied calmly. "Lorna Whitel's our neighbor, makes it our business." Kincaid nudged his horse forward. "I'd like to see that warrant you mentioned." Rollins hesitated. "Don't have it on me. It's back in town." Kincaid's eyes hardened. "Funny thing," he said coldly, "since I'm the only man in this territory authorized to issue warrants." He paused, "and I don't recall signing one." The sheriff straightened in his saddle. "Looks to me like you're trespassing on private property, armed, issuing threats." His voice dropped. "That puts you on the wrong side of the law." "Disturbing the peace," Sheriff Doran Kincaid said evenly. "That earns jail time, Ketch." The silence tightened like a drawn wire. Ketch Rollins' men glanced toward him, hands drifting closer to their guns. Across the yard, the neighboring ranchers mirrored the motion, boots planted, eyes hard. One wrong twitch would turn the ground into a killing field. "Mr. Garrick Warren won't like this," Rollins muttered at last. "Then Mr. Warren can take it up with the law," Kincaid replied calmly. "Now move along, all of you, and Ketch, next time you claim to have a warrant, make sure it actually exists." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rollins jerked his reins and turned his horse. "This isn't over, Carson." "Not by a long shot," Bren answered. The riders vanished into the darkness, hooves fading like a promise of trouble. Still, no one relaxed. The neighbors stayed until dawn, setting watches and forming a loose defensive ring around the house. When the sky finally paled, Sheriff Kincaid lingered behind, accepting a cup of coffee from Lorna. "I can't always be here," he said quietly. "And Garrick Warren's got friends in territorial offices. Sooner or later, he'll find a legal way to come at you." "Then we face it when it comes," Bren replied. Kincaid studied the surface of his coffee. "There might be another way." Bren met his eyes. "I'm listening." "Men like Warren build empires on threats and blood," the sheriff said. "And men like that leave trails, paper, witnesses, evidence that federal marshals or even the territorial governor might find interesting." Lorna leaned forward. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that needs collecting by someone who knows how." Kincaid's gaze settled meaningfully on Bren. "I'm just a ranch hand," Bren said flatly. Kincaid snorted. "Sure you are, and I'm just a sheriff who didn't notice 8 armed men trying to haul off a citizen in the middle of the night." He stood. Think on it. Sometimes the cleanest way to end a war is to win it fast and legal. After he left, Lorna turned to Bren. "He's right. We can't keep reacting forever," he said. "But if I start digging into Warren..." "It's no more dangerous than waiting for the next fire," she answered. "At least this way, we're not helpless." Mara appeared in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep. "Are the bad men gone?" "For now, sunshine," Bren said, lifting her into his arms. "But Mrs. Lorna and I were just figuring out how to make sure they don't come back." "Good," Mara said firmly. "I don't like hiding in the cellar anymore. It's dark, and it smells like turnips." Despite everything, they laughed. Trust a child to cut straight to the truth. Over the next days, the plan took shape. Using old lawman connections he'd never thought he'd need again, Bren began quietly gathering information on Garrick Warren's operations. Vale and the other ranchers helped by creating distractions, errands, cattle drives, excuses that gave Bren room to move unseen. The break came from an unexpected source. Brex Hollow, a former Warren employee, approached them at Edna Blythe's general store. He was nervous, eyes darting toward the windows. "I heard you're standing up to the old man," he whispered. "About time someone did." "Why tell us?" Lorna asked gently. "Because he had my brother killed," Brex said. "Called it a riding accident, but I know better." Varn Isles was about to testify. He went on. About Warren's land fraud. Then he turned up dead. Brex pulled a worn notebook from inside his coat. Varn kept records. Dates, names, payments. How Warren forced small ranchers out, then filed false claims on their land. Bren leafed through the pages. If verified, it was devastating. "Why didn't you take this to the law earlier?" Bren asked. Brex gave a bitter laugh. "You think Ketch Rollins is the only one Warren pays?" He hesitated. "But Sheriff Kincaid's different. And now, with all of you standing together, maybe someone will finally listen." They agreed to meet again 2 nights later. Brex never arrived. They found his body the next morning at the bottom of Widow's Canyon. "Another accident," Bren said grimly. "He knew the risk," Lorna replied softly. "He died trying to do the right thing." "Then we can't let it be for nothing." The notebook, hidden beneath the soil in Lorna's flower bin, became the heart of their quiet war against Garrick Warren. Bren Carson double-checked every entry, followed every trail, and quietly tracked down witnesses, building a case solid enough to survive a courtroom. All the while, he kept up the appearance of nothing more than a hired ranch hand. The attack came without warning. Bren was in the barn when Mayra's scream tore through the night. He ran for the house. Inside, Ketch Rollins stood with Mayra pinned against him, a knife pressed tight beneath her chin. 2 of his men restrained Lorna, her arms wrenched behind her. "Evening, Carson," Rollins said calmly, almost friendly. "Now here's how this goes. You hand over that notebook and anything else you've been collecting. Then we all take a little ride." "Let them go," Bren said, his voice low and deadly still. "Your problem is with me." Rollins smiled. "That's where you're mistaken. You all know too much now." His grip tightened. Mayra whimpered. Bren's mind raced. Distance, angles, timing. Then he heard it. Hooves, fast, closing. Rollins heard it too. "Sounds like we're running out of time," he said sharply. "The notebook, now, or I start cutting." "It's in the house," Bren said. "Kitchen cupboard, behind the dishes." Rollins motioned. "Get it." One of the men rushed out and returned moments later with the worn notebook. Rollins flipped through the pages, eyes gleaming. "Good." That was when the barn doors exploded inward. Orrin Vale stormed in alongside Sheriff Doran Kincaid, guns raised, followed by more than a dozen armed neighbors. In the chaos, Bren moved. He struck with the speed of lightning, his fist slamming into Rollins' knife hand. The blade flew across the room as Mayra twisted free and ran straight into Lorna's arms. Rollins reached for his gun. Bren was faster. They crashed together, slamming into the wall. Rollins was larger, stronger. But Bren fought with something far more dangerous. The rage of a father defending his family. They rolled across the floor, grappling, fists striking bone and breath. A gunshot cracked the air. Rollins stiffened. His eyes widened as he looked down at the spreading red across his shirt. Then he stared at Bren, who stood above him, pistol smoking. "You shot me," Rollins gasped. "You threatened my daughter," Bren replied coldly. Rollins dropped to his knees, then pitched forward. He was dead before he hit the floor. The room erupted, shouting, movement, boots scrambling. Seeing their leader fall and surrounded on all sides, the remaining worn riders threw down their weapons. Sheriff Kincaid stepped forward, voice carrying, "Self-defense." Everyone here saw it. Knife to a child's throat. Then one of the captured men broke. "It was Garrick Warren," he shouted desperately. "All of it, the burnings, the threats, even Breck's Hollow. Warren ordered everything." Kincaid's eyes hardened. "You willing to testify to that?" The man nodded frantically. "Just keep me alive long enough to do it." Bren dropped to his knees beside Lorna and Mara, pulling them both into his arms. They were shaking, but unharmed. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now." "Is he dead?" Mara asked quietly, not looking toward the body. "Yes, Sunshine," Bren said. "He can't hurt anyone ever again." "Good," she said fiercely, then broke into tears. As the deputies secured the scene, Sheriff Kincaid approached Bren. "That notebook Brex died for," he said. "We'll need it as evidence." Bren handed it over without hesitation. "There's enough here to bury Garrick Warren," Kincaid said. "With testimony? More than enough. Federal marshals will be very interested." He paused. "You did good, Carson. Your lawman instincts saved lives tonight." "I'm not a lawman," Bren said quietly. "Just a rancher protecting his family." Kincaid smiled faintly. "If you say so. But if you ever want that badge back—" "No," Bren said gently. "I've found where I belong." As the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in colors of relief and hard-earned victory, the three of them stood together. The danger had passed. Garrick Warren would face justice. His reign of fear was finished. The small ranchers were free at last. "What happens now?" Lorna asked softly. Bren drew them both close. "Now," he said, "we live. We raise cattle," Bren said gently, "and we raise children. We build something honest on this land. Together?" Mara asked, hope bright in her eyes. "Together," he answered, lifting his gaze to Lorna over their daughter's head. Because that was what she was now. Their daughter. As surely as the land beneath their boots, they were a family. The war was finished. Now the healing could begin. Spring arrived early in the Montana Territory that year, spilling wildflowers across the valleys and filling the air with the sound of rushing snowmelt. The ranch looked stronger than it ever had. New fences ran straight and clean. The rebuilt barn stood firm against the open sky. The cattle grew sleek on fresh grass. But the greatest change lived inside the house, where laughter now drifted as freely as the smell of morning coffee. 6 months had passed since Ketch Rawlins's death and Garrick Warren's arrest. Federal marshals had come, taken testimony, and hauled Warren away in chains. His empire collapsed quickly after that. Land he'd stolen was returned. Other holdings were sold fairly to men and women who had worked the soil honestly. One bright morning, Lorna stood on the porch watching Bren teach Mara how to rope a fence post. The girl's throws were improving every day. "Like this, Papa," she called, sending the loop sailing wide but proud. "Perfect, Sunshine," Bren laughed. "You'll out-rope me before summer's done." "I want to rope a real calf next time." "When you're ready," he promised. "All things in their time." Lorna smiled at the phrase. It had become their family saying, learned through hardship and patience. All things in their time. A rider appeared at the gate. Orrin Vale pulled up with a letter from town. Bren took the envelope, frowning at the official seal. Such papers rarely brought good news. But as he read, his expression shifted. Surprise. Then something close to awe. "What is it?" Lorna asked, stepping beside him. The territorial judge, Bren said slowly. He's awarded restitution from Warren's seized assets. For the barn, the threats, the attempted violence. He glanced at Mayra before finishing. For everything. It's enough to secure this ranch for years. Lorna's hands trembled as she read the amount. It wasn't just fair. It was life-changing. We could expand, she whispered. Hire proper hands. Build something lasting. We could, Bren agreed. Then softly, we could do a lot of things. That night, after Myra was asleep, they sat side by side on the porch, speaking of possibilities they'd never dared dream before. Better breeding stock, improved water lines, even a small school for the valley's children. Eamon always dreamed of this, Lorna said quietly, making the ranch something that would last for generations. He'd be proud, Bren said. What we've built, she corrected gently. I couldn't have survived without you, without either of you. Bren took her hand. There's something I should have asked months ago, he said, but I wanted to be sure the danger was behind us. Her heart quickened. Lorna, he said, steady and sincere, marry me. She drew in a breath. Not because we need protection, not for appearances, but because I love you. Because Mayra loves you. Because we're already a family in every way that matters. And I want to make it true before God and man. Tears slid down her cheeks. I can't give you children of your own, she whispered. You already gave me everything, Bren replied. You brought my daughter back to life. You gave us a home, a reason to hope. He cupped her face. You taught us that hearts can heal, even in the hardest ground. You're all I want. She laughed softly through tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. They were married on a brilliant May morning beneath a wide cottonwood tree. The entire valley gathered to witness it. Mayra served as flower girl, scattering wild petals with solemn dedication. She wore a blue dress Lorna had sewn herself, ribbons tied neatly into her braids. Do I look pretty, Mama Lorna? She asked earlier that morning, the new word slipping out naturally. You look beautiful, sweet pea, Lorna had said, like an angel. Good. Mayra nodded seriously. Angels should look nice at weddings. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and true. And when Bren kissed his bride, the cheers rang so loud they startled the cattle grazing in the nearby pasture, echoing across land that finally, at long last, knew peace. Arin Vale, standing in as best man, slapped Bren on the shoulder with a grin. About time, friend. We were starting to take wagers on when you'd finally come to your senses. The celebration carried on deep into the evening. Long tables sagged beneath dishes brought by neighbors, and the sound of fiddle music drifted across the open range. Children darted between the dancers, laughter echoing through the warm air. Myra leading a noisy troop in an overly serious game that somehow involved the barn cats and a set of invented rules only she understood. As the sun dipped low, Sheriff Doran Kincaid approached the newly married couple. Thought you'd want the latest, he said. Garrick Warren was convicted on every charge, 20 years behind bars. Justice, Lorna said quietly. Indeed. The sheriff produced an envelope. And there's more. This came through official channels. The territorial government's looking for steady folks to serve as local magistrates. People who understand both law and community. He glanced at Bren. Interested. Bren looked at his wife, then at Mayra, who ran up proudly holding a captured firefly in her hands. "Thank you, Sheriff," Bren said at last. "But no, I've got everything I need right here. Let someone else wear the badge. I'm content being a rancher and a family man." Kincaid smiled. "Fair enough. Offer stands if you ever change your mind." Later, as the music softened and the crowd thinned, the three of them found a quiet moment on the porch steps. Mayra sat between them, eyelids heavy with sleep. "Are we a real family now?" she asked drowsily. "We've been a real family for a while," Bren told her gently. "Today just made it official." "Good," she murmured, "because I told the other kids Mama Lorna was my real mama. Billy Stevens said that didn't count unless there was a wedding." She yawned. "Now I can tell him he was wrong." Lorna pulled her close. "You can tell him whatever you like, as long as it's true and kind." "I'll tell him I have the best parents in the whole territory," Mayra said solemnly. "That's the truest thing I know," Bren agreed. As stars bloomed overhead, the celebration slowly faded. Neighbors headed home with promises to help during the summer roundup. Children were carried sleeping to wagons, and the newlyweds were left with the quiet satisfaction of a day fully lived. In the years that followed, the Whittle Ranch flourished. They hired honest hands, expanded their land fairly, and became pillars of the growing valley. Mayra grew tall and capable, steady in the saddle like her father, and strong in heart like her mother. She never forgot Alice. Her birth mother's picture stayed on her dresser, memory held gently but never painfully. But Lorna was Mama in every way that mattered. The one who taught her letters and sums, how to bake bread and mend tears, how to be firm without cruelty and brave without bitterness. More children came to the ranch, though not by birth. Orphans, runaways, lost souls in need of warmth and safety. One by one, they were welcomed in, until the house rang with noise and laughter and the beautiful disorder of a large family. Each child chosen, each one loved, living proof that family was forged by devotion, not blood alone. "Do you remember when it was just the three of us?" Bren asked one evening, watching the children chase fireflies across the yard. "I remember being lonely," Lorna replied softly. "I remember thinking I'd never laugh again." She smiled faintly. "Now I can barely count them all at supper." She leaned into his arms. "Eamon was right," she said. "This land needed children's laughter. It just took time to find the right ones." "And the right moment," Bren added. "All things in their time." When full dark settled, they called the children inside. The familiar chaos followed. Washed faces, missing nightshirts, stories demanded, songs requested. Mayra, now 13 and endlessly patient, helped tuck in the younger ones. "You'll make a fine mother someday," Lorna told her quietly. "I learned from the best," Mayra replied simply. Later, Bren and Lorna sat together on the porch, the same porch where he'd knocked on a cold autumn night years before. "Did you ever think," Bren asked softly, "that opening that door would lead us here?" "I thought I was hiring a ranch hand for the winter," Lorna admitted. "I never imagined I was opening the door to an entirely new life." He smiled. "Any regrets?" She rested her head against his shoulder. "Not a single one." "Not a single one," Bren said softly. "And you?" "Only that it took so long for our paths to cross," Lorna answered. They sat in an easy, familiar silence, listening to the living sounds of their ranch. Somewhere beyond the fence line, a calf called out for its mother. In the barn, the cats moved quietly through the hay, hunting mice. Upstairs, their children slept, safe, warm, and loved, dreaming the peaceful dreams that only come when a child knows they belong. "I love you, Mrs. Carson," Bren said, as he did every night. "And I love you, Mr. Carson," Lorna replied, just as faithfully. The moon lifted over the Montana mountains, its pale silver light washing across the land they had fought to protect and the home they had built with their own hands. It was not the life either of them had once imagined, but it was the life they had been given. And together, they had shaped it into something beautiful. From grief had grown joy. From isolation, family. From a desperate knock on a widow's door had risen a love as steady and enduring as the earth beneath their feet. When morning came, there would be coffee simmering on the stove, bread on the table, chores to tend, laughter to answer, and the honest rhythm of work and rest. The quiet blessings of a life fully lived, but for now they remained there in the dark, side by side. Two souls who had finally found their way home to one another. Grateful for second chances, grateful for courage, grateful for the moment they had chosen to say yes when love came knocking. All things in their time, and their time was now, and always, and more than enough. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.